You can see that these three indicators predict every recession. During the 1990 recession, each of these lines experienced a significant downturn before the actual recession occurred. During the 2000s dot-com recession and the 2008 financial crisis, we can see the same downward trend in these indicators before the recessions took place. So these indicators have a great track record of predicting recessions. But the truth is that the majority of financial professionals and investors are doing one of two things. They are either using these indicators incorrectly or they are not using these indicators at all. So in this video, I'll talk about why most mainstream use of these indicators is incorrect. And if you watch to the end of this video, I'll get into what these indicators are currently saying about the probability of a 2024 recession. The Duncan Leading Index was made popular by economist Wallace Duncan, and it was designed based on the concept that changes in the economy stem from a few select categories. Despite popular opinion, most segments of the economy do not contract and are generally extremely stable. We often hear comments such as, the consumer is fine, or the consumer is holding up the economy, or we are a services economy. These comments are generally accepted as true given the frequency that they are repeated, but the reality is that these comments are exactly the opposite of what you want to focus on if your goal is to track and get ahead of major changes in the economy. The economy is made up of four primary categories: private consumption, private investment, net exports, and government spending. It is true that private consumption, or the consumer, makes up about 70% of total GDP, but that leads to the incorrect conclusion that the consumer drives the ebbs and flows of the business cycle. The Duncan Leading Index involves tracking three narrow segments of the economy: durable goods consumption, residential investment, and non residential investment. But through my research process and by studying dozens of business cycles, I found that it's very easy to improve the Duncan Leading Index by tracking durable goods consumption, residential investment, and only business equipment investment. We call this the modified Duncan Leading Index, and it's superior to the original construction because the non residential investment in structures and the investment in intellectual property are not leading indicators but rather lagging indicators. This chart shows the investment in non residential structures. It includes things like hospitals, office buildings, and shopping centers. And as the chart shows, this category is not a leading indicator, often reaching a peak during a recession and forming a bottom way after a downturn is over. Including this category in the Duncan Leading Index dilutes its effectiveness, and it's better to exclude it from the analysis. So we are left with three narrow categories of the economy that are responsible for virtually all of the booms and busts: durable goods consumption, residential investment, and business equipment investment. These three categories are less than 20% of the economy, but they are responsible for all the changes and cyclicality in the economy. This analysis is far different from the more common analysis of watching the consumer, since durable goods consumption, the only consumer category in this modified index, is less than 10% of the overall economy. When you track or focus specifically on the consumer and all consumer spending, you are capturing spending on healthcare services, food, clothing, and many other non discretionary items that must be consumed inside a recession or in an economic boom. In nominal dollars, the components of the modified Duncan Leading Index, what we call cyclical GDP, have contracted in 17.5% of the quarters since 1956. Total GDP has only contracted in 2.9% of the quarters, and the non cyclical part of the economy, what most people focus on, has only contracted in 1.5% of the quarters since 1956. So why focus on this part of the economy at all? The modified Duncan Leading Index takes our three cyclical categories of the economy and plots them as a percentage of GDP. You can see that these three categories swing from 14% of GDP to 22% of GDP and always fall sharply into recessions and rise rapidly in expansions. These three categories are highly impacted by changes in the availability of money and credit. And you can see that when the Federal Reserve started to tighten monetary policy in early 2022, this index started to decline, which was very much expected. However, we've seen a rather mild decline, falling just 1% of GDP, which is not much in the context of what was a very extreme monetary tightening cycle. When we decompose this index into its three components, we can see exactly what's going on with the economy and why it's so critical to monitor these areas of the economy. This chart shows the three components of the modified Duncan leading index, and it's clear that these three categories tend to move in sync, as they are all impacted by the same changes in monetary policy. When the Federal Reserve started to tighten monetary policy in early 2022, we saw the durable goods consumption and residential investment categories fall as expected, but business equipment investment did not. How could this be? Why would a very interest rate sensitive sector not decline at all after a huge tightening of monetary policy? Within the business equipment category, perhaps the most important segment is auto or transportation equipment. This was an industry that was impacted by supply chains more significantly than any other sector of the economy. In 2021 and 2022, the economy was booming, but auto equipment investment plunged. This was extremely unusual and completely out of sync with the normal order of the business cycle. Then, when the Federal Reserve started to tighten monetary policy, auto equipment investment surged, completely the opposite of what normally happens. Even more unusual is that auto equipment investment has diverged from auto consumption due to the atypical cycle after the pandemic. Auto consumption, which is part of durable goods consumption, is trending lower, while auto equipment investment is trending higher. This will reconverge with time as these issues normalize, but this has given the illusion that parts of the economy are insensitive to interest rates or that a recession could be avoided. Total vehicle sales are very cyclical and almost always respond to monetary tightening, but this cycle was thrown off. Vehicle sales declined while the economy was booming and then increased while the economy was slowing. This was all related to supply chains and distortions. Now we are seeing auto sales trend lower while auto equipment investment is rising. Clearly a trend that is due to normalization and not an economy that is just powering through higher interest rates. We can see this trend even more clearly with heavy truck sales, a component of total auto sales. Normally, heavy truck sales are one of the most cyclical elements in the entire economy. Due to supply chains, heavy truck sales fell sharply in 2020, 2021, and early 2022 as the economy was booming because people simply could not get trucks. Then, as the Fed tightened monetary policy, heavy truck sales exploded higher, and this is what caused large parts of the economy to appear insensitive to interest rates. Now heavy truck sales are rolling over again, more in line with post-tightening cycle environments. The inversion of the yield curve is a critical signpost in the business cycle. This chart shows the trend of heavy truck sales after the yield curve inverted, in all instances going back to the 1960s. Today in black, it's clear that heavy truck sales are doing better than normal in the 20 months after the yield curve inverted. But this trend will not last, and it will ultimately converge to the normal pattern, which will then impact auto equipment investment, slowing the broader cyclical part of the economy that we track with the modified Duncan leading index. So it's clear that it's critical to watch the narrow sectors of durable goods consumption, residential investment, and business equipment investment. These sectors make up what we call the modified Duncan leading index, and it should be what you follow since these categories are the ones that drive the ebbs and flows in the economy. Other sectors hardly ever contract, less than 2% of the time, so it's not worth focusing your attention there, even if they are a larger portion of the economy by size. All the changes happen in the cyclical economy, and the story about what's been happening in the economy can always be explained by these cyclical sectors. Right now, the modified Duncan leading index and its three subcategories are showing an economy that's slowing down and remains highly vulnerable to a further downturn, specifically once distortions in the transportation equipment sector normalize after falling out of sync with the broader cyclical economy. The economy is not out of the woods yet, particularly because the Fed continues to delay monetary easing, which would benefit this part of the economy and reduce the probability of a recession. At EPB Research, our main focus is tracking business cycles and getting ahead of major trends by focusing on the parts of the economy that really matter. I made a short 10-minute video describing this process from A to Z, and it will help you gain a much deeper understanding of the main drivers of the business cycle. Just click the end screen at the top right of this video to begin watching, and I will see you in the next video.